Good day from Washington, everyone, and welcome to a special edition, a Saturday edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. We've got a lot of big breaking news. We begin with, while abortion opponents are celebrating a long-sought victory, public outrage is growing across the U.S. among abortion rights supporters on the heels of the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. In cities across the country, protesters gathering to rally for a second day after massive demonstrations on Friday. This morning, pro- and anti-abortion rights activists clashing in front of the High Court, shouting chants at each other. As of today, abortion is banned in at least 9 states, with trigger bans in several more set to take effect in the near future. President Biden speaking earlier about the landmark ruling.
My administration is going to focus on how they administer and whether or not they violate other laws, like deciding to not allow people to cross state lines to get public health services. And we're going to take actions to protect women's rights and reproductive health.
Do you think the Supreme Court is broken, in your view?
I think the Supreme Court has made some terrible decisions.
Those remarks coming as the president signed the bipartisan gun safety bill into law today, the first gun legislation in nearly 30 years to reform gun laws. The law includes enhanced background checks for people under 21, funding for mental health and school safety, incentives for states to implement so-called red flag laws, and limits on the boyfriend loophole. Right now, President Biden and the First Lady are heading to Germany. They left Washington this morning to attend the annual G7 conference, the summit of world leaders. And joining me now, MSNBC's Yasmin Vasugian outside the Supreme Court, and Kathy Park in Mississippi, and here in the studio, NBC's justice correspondent Pete Williams. Yasmin, first to you, what's the scene like there right now?
Andrea, let me just take you through some of the crowd that we've been experiencing here throughout the morning. I'll tell you, Andrea, just before I start, I was here when the decision was initially leaked, right? And it was emotional. It was visceral. There was a lot of people out here, thousands of people out here protesting. This is a bit of a different scene than we saw the last time around. It is more emotional. It is more visceral because people understand this is now the law of the land after the decision was released yesterday from the Supreme Court. Let me just kind of take you through the crowd because it's a bit of a standoff. And Pete, stay with me as we weave through here. It's a bit of a standoff on the interior of the crowd, Andrea. Pete, swing around this way. You have people that are advocating for the decision that was released by the Supreme Court yesterday. Surrounding them are folks that are advocating for women's rights. It has been a shout-off. It has been a standoff as well. People saying my body, my choice, and some of the signage here. I saw a sign that said, Ruth sent me as well. Control guns right here, not women, of course, referencing the decision that was released on Thursday by the Supreme Court versus the decision that was released on Friday. This is a multi-level protest, Andrea. Pete, let's walk this way a little bit because this crowd is growing minute by minute. And when I say this is a multi-level protest, it's not just about abortion rights here. It's about the possibility of a slippery slope, of course, referring to the comments made in the majority opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas, along with other decisions that have been made and released by the Supreme Court over the last couple of days, references made to guns, obviously, following the mass shootings in both Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas, as well. These people are impassioned. They want change. It doesn't seem like they're going anywhere as well. And I asked a lot of folks throughout the day, and we're going to be showing this throughout the next couple of hours. I asked them what needs to change, what needs to be done. How do you change things for women going forward? And everyone now saying that you need to get out and vote, that Democrats need to get out and vote. I also asked them specifically, do you feel as if Democrats grew apathetic towards the issue, as if nothing will actually happen, that Roe will actually not be overturned? And they said exactly right. They felt as if Democrats took Roe for granted. And now they feel as if they have arrived here because of the inaction of Democrats, along with the action of the Republican legislature as well. And they worry that that same sort of thing will happen when it comes to the precedent that has been set when it comes to contraceptives, the precedent that has been set when it comes to marriage equality, and so on and so forth. I'm going to be speaking with a biracial couple, Andrea, in just a couple of minutes. I'm going to have a one-on-one conversation with them who are worried about marriage equality here in this country, who are worried about marriage in general, being a biracial couple, and you're going to want to hear that interview as well. So, Andrea, I know that we need to talk through the intricacies of this decision, the majority opinion as well. So I'm going to toss it back to you so Pete Williams can take us through that.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. You are right there at ground zero at the High Court, and we'll be checking back in just a few moments. Joining us now, NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams, who, of course, has been covering this issue for decades at the Supreme Court and all the legislative action as well. Pete, this is the end game here, and let's take us through the decision itself.
Okay.
And what was so unusual about it, in fact, in Clarence Thomas' particular arguments yesterday.
Well, what's unusual about the decision is it says that there is no right to abortion. Roe v. Wade was egregiously decided, and what the majority says here is that the problem is you can't find a right either expressly in the Constitution for abortion or by looking at any of the other constitutional protections, including the 14th Amendment's guarantee of due process of law. The test, according to Justice Samuel Alito, and he attracted, of course, just 4 other votes. This was a 5-4 ruling on this part of the decision. The test, he says, is whether a constitutional right or whether a right was deeply rooted in history and tradition and essential to the concept of ordered liberty. Now, that is language that the Supreme Court first articulated decades ago in a case about assisted suicide when it says there's no constitutional right to that. That, he said, is the test, and therefore, he says, Roe v. Wade flunks that test. Now, you mentioned Justice Thomas's concurrence. He says, I agree with that, and by that same logic, he says, I think we need to examine all of our other precedents that have undergone that similar analysis about substantive due process. Contraceptives, intimate sexual relations, same-sex marriage, deciding where your children going to school, refusing medical treatment. He says he thinks the court now needs to go back to all and re-examine all those other rights. I must say, Andrea, I think he is a committee of one on that. He didn't seem to get any other takers for that. And in fact, Alito says in his opinion several times, Samuel Alito, who wrote the majority opinion, this is only about abortion. And abortion is different because it involves a moral question, the taking of a potential life. And Brett Kavanaugh, in his concurrence, says much the same thing. He says this decision today has nothing to do with those other precedents.
But, of course, there's a lot of skepticism and lack of respect for the court, frankly, among even senators who feel that, Amy Klobuchar told me this yesterday, others are joining in, who on the Judiciary Committee, you know about Susan Collins, who has a critical vote, Joe Manchin, another critical vote, not on the Judiciary Committee. They feel they were lied to, frankly, because there are specific questions and answers in their confirmation hearings, and now notes have been released by the New York Times, which we have not independently confirmed, of the private meeting between Senator Collins and Justice Kavanaugh, where he said this is a 45-year precedent. At the time, it was 45 years, and, you know, he very clearly said he would stick with the precedent of Roe v. Wade. They feel misled.
Yeah, well, I think it's one thing to say, you know, your answers in the confirmation hearing seem to say you would go by the precedents. It's another thing if there were reassurances given in a private setting that went beyond that, because I think every Republican appointee sort of basically says the same thing about Roe v. Wade. One of the things that I found puzzling about the decision is the court seemed to say, you know, when you look at factors about why you would overturn precedent and why you would sort of disregard this legal concept called stare decisis, one of the things you look at is what's called reliance interest. Has the country relied on this decision? And the Supreme Court says it's not enough of reliance interest with Roe. I found that a little puzzling, given that millions of American women have basically led their lives on the assumption that the right to abortion would be there. You would think there was heavy reliance interest, but the majority says no.
And as you've been pointing out, this is the first time in American history the court has taken away a constitutional right once conferred. Because there are a lot of things that are not in the Constitution.
Yeah, the first time it's taken one away that's broadly accepted and widely recognized. There was a time more than a century ago when the court said there was a constitutional right to enter into contracts, and then it later took that away. But that was a very technical thing that applied to businesses. This was a right that millions of American women have depended on. It was widely recognized. So they've never done that before.
And this certainly, as you've also been pointing out in all of your reporting, this is a supermajority now, and this is an indication of the future. And Justice Roberts, the chief, doesn't really have control of the court.
Well, he didn't go along on this one. He did go along with them, however, on the gun decision on Thursday, and that was also a product of the court's supermajority. And I think one thing that's not gotten a lot of attention about that, not only did the court say the New York law has to be struck down because it required some special showing to get a permit to have a concealed weapon, what the court says is, in the future, going forward, when courts consider whether to uphold gun legislation, they have to look at whether the restrictions have a historic antecedent in the nation's history, at the nation's founding almost. That's a pretty strict test. And I think there are many people who say, you know, there are now going to be lots of new challenges to gun laws based on this Supreme Court decision.
A big week in the Supreme Court, and they still have a couple of decisions left to come before the end of the term.
We'll get more decisions on Monday.
We'll be ready. I know you'll be there. Thank you so much, Pete Williams.
Okay.
Thanks for kicking us off. And let's head back to Yasmin Vazougian in front of the Supreme Court in D.C. Yasmin, I know there's plenty of reaction to this decision from across the country and certainly where you are on both sides.
Yeah, there certainly is plenty of reaction. I will say this, Andrew, just weighing in on the conversation that you were having with Pete there, and I'll say that many people feel here as if this was a highly political decision. They also don't necessarily trust the fact that Justice Thomas is a party of one. They feel as if that type of thinking may have been one of the reasons why this country is where it is now, and Roe has in fact been overturned. I just also want to warn viewers throughout this coverage of these protests that we're having. There's a lot of expletives that are being used, a lot of expletives written on signs as well. So kind of a pre-warning to you on that, because some of the stuff we can't necessarily avoid as we're kind of covering the landscape of this whole story. You talk about many of the states that will plan on banning abortions outright, 13 of them having trigger laws in place, up to 26 states possibly, an all-out ban on abortions when all is said and done. A lot of folks waking up to that this morning. Newspapers across the country referencing the decision made here by the Supreme Court, released here on Friday morning. And of course, the clinic at the center of this case, Andrea, is Jackson Women's Health, and that is where we find Kathy Park for us in Jackson, Mississippi. Kathy, take us there for a moment, if you will. Talk to us about what's happening on the ground there.
Yasmin, that's absolutely right. So we are right in front of the last abortion clinic here in Mississippi. And as you mentioned, there is a trigger law here in the state of Mississippi. So essentially the days are numbered for this clinic. We've been told that protesters on both sides of this very divisive issue have been out since around 4 o'clock this morning. It's getting heated at times, and that's why we are also seeing the police activity as well to kind of keep the calm. But earlier today, we had a chance to speak with both sides, the advocates on both sides of this issue. Take a listen.
Obviously, we're happy about it, but I mean, it's still killing babies in there. I mean, it's still going on.
I feel like there was a lot of tension yesterday. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of them out here with the fetal corn and stuff normally, but we don't have the ladders every day. That's an occasional thing. And y'all know they're a lot more aggressive.
And as I mentioned, this is a trigger law state. So what does that exactly mean? Here in the state of Mississippi, essentially there is a 10-day window for the Attorney General to certify the decision that came down by the Supreme Court. And all signs seem to suggest that this will be official in a matter of days. So that means this clinic will be closing its doors. However, they knew this day could potentially come. So they were working behind the scenes, moving the resources to another location in New Mexico. So they will be working with another clinic there and directing women to gain access to abortions legally and safely at that location. They're also telling people that they are raising funds to help those women here in Mississippi and beyond to gain those the access to abortion services. Yasmin?
Kathy, you mentioned the state of New Mexico obviously being a safe harbor zone, it seems, for a lot of women seeking out abortion services. I actually visited Albuquerque just last week, traveling with 20 young women from Dallas, Texas, over to Albuquerque who were seeking out an abortion. They were sponsored by a church in Dallas. I made the whole travel with them over a 24-hour period. I'm going to be showing that at the top of my show in the 3 p.m. hour. So it just kind of sparks my, my memory and your mention, of course, of of the state of New Mexico and how that's going to be a safe harbor zone as we look at the entire country and what, in fact, will be banned in what states. Want to talk to Ashley and Michael here. You are both married. You have children. And I will also say outright, you are an interracial couple. And so you have a lot of concerns now with this decision coming down from the Supreme Court. Ashley, talk to me about why you came out here today.
We came out here today because we've got 2 little boys who are wonderful choices that we got to make, and they deserve better of their country, of their officials, than what we got yesterday.
What about you, Michael?
I came out here because my whole life I've always taken this as a basic human right, and to have it snatched away so quickly by some people that I didn't elect, that scares me. And then I'm just scared of the domino effect. What's next? Are you going to come for me? Are you guys going to come for my gay and trans and lesbian colleagues, friends? It's frightening.
So you're talking about gay rights, obviously, marriage equality, the possibility of a slippery slope, also referencing the opinion that we heard, the majority opinion from Justice Thomas as well, and being an interracial couple. Is that something that worries you as well, the precedent that was set in the Supreme Court back in the 60s?
Absolutely, yeah. The precedents that set any protections that we have that are based on bodily autonomy or privacy are at risk, and that includes our marriage, that includes gay marriage, that includes contraception, that includes all these things that so many people are so affected by, and it's scary.
Are you hopeful for change or hopeless right now? How are you feeling?
I'm both. I'm scared, I'm disillusioned, but also I see everybody out here, and it's like there's a lot of us out here who we expect better from our government. This isn't right.
What needs to happen?
Activism, votes, and there are so many voices here that need to be heard. We can't go home and just, argue with our spouses about it or talk to our girlfriends about it. We have to be heard.
We have to be heard, and voting as well. Ashley, Michael, thank you guys both for sticking around for us in this hot D.C. sun right about now. Andrea, so you heard it there from Ashley and Michael. Andrea, kind of not only a reaction to the decision here leveled on Friday morning, but also the slippery slope, the things that could be in the pipeline to come because of the makeup of the Supreme Court. And they feel as if how to change things, how to affect change, it is to turn out, to be heard, and to, of course, vote.
Well, it's great to hear from you and those voices in your interviews. Thank you so much, Yasmin. And of course, we're going to be, back to you in just a bit. And meanwhile, the court's 5-4 decision to overturn Roe v. Wade was met with a searing dissent from the liberal justices, Stephen Breyer, Sonia Sotomayor, and Elena Kagan, writing, "Whatever the exact scope of the coming laws, one result of today's decision is certain: the curtailment of women's rights and of their status as free and equal citizens." Joining us now, Nancy Northrup, the president and CEO of the Center for Reproductive Rights, a nonprofit law firm which represented the Jackson Women's Health Organization before the Supreme Court. Of course, the group in this case, in the Mississippi case, Nancy, liberal justices, in the dissent written by Justice Breyer, warning that women's rights are going to be curtailed. You've said this decision is going to spark a public health emergency. Tell us what that looks like from your perspective.
Yes, and I'm so glad in your reporting that you were down on the ground at the Jackson Women's Health Organization, because what is happening today for Jackson Women's Health Organizations and for other of the clients of clinics that we represent around the country is just chaos, confusion, and trying to provide abortion services to the very last minute that they can. Because the reality of yesterday's decision, it's going to change people's lives, because some people are not going to be able to get abortion care if they can't travel hundreds or even thousands of miles to get from their states. So, yesterday we saw this decision. The dissent, as you just talked about, was very strong and clear that women were left out of the equation. The 1 in 4 women who make the decision in their lifetime to end a pregnancy are absent from the concerns and considerations of the majority, and woke up today with less rights than they've had for the past 50 years.
And what happened in Mississippi at the Jackson Health Center?
Well, I'm just saying today, right, they're having to continue to see patients and yet deal with the fact that the Mississippi trigger law will be going into effect, presumably, very shortly. Now, believe me, legal and policy organizations like ours at the Center for Reproductive Rights are going to be doing everything we can, using every legal lever to stop these trigger laws from going into effect. It is, they have legal, problems with them that they were enacted sometimes many, many, many years ago to spring into effect in this way. But it is so important that people listening, make sure that if they're in states that are on the brink of banning abortion, they don't give up yet. They need to call the clinics in their states. They need to see what's happening there. They need to call the abortion funds to see if they can be helped either in their state or somewhere else, because this is going to be a long, long battle.
Now, already that was the only one left in Mississippi, as I understood it. So this was the only place. The president said today that his administration is determined to protect women's ability to travel to other states. But that doesn't mean funding them. There are a lot of women who don't have child care possibilities. They can't take off from work to travel the hundreds or thousands of miles. So protecting them from just traveling across state lines is one thing legally. Merrick Garland said that as well, the Attorney General yesterday. But what about the resources to do that?
Absolutely. It's important that the Biden administration also looks into, is it possible to use federal funds to help support both its own employees and those that rely on the federal government for their medical care with travel to other states for this essential health care? Luckily, companies are stepping up. We saw Citigroup, of course, make the decision that their employees will be covered for travel to other states. Other companies are going to be doing that as well. And there's also abortion funds. People have been donating money and should continue to the abortion funds to help people to travel. But what's also really just important for everyone to know is Congress has the power to address this. Congress has the power to make sure that abortion rights are preserved across the nation. And they've taken votes on the Women's Health Protection Act. 49 senators voted in favor. The House has passed it. It's really time for this Congress to step in, protect this across the nation, and stop the chaos and the harm and the hurt that's coming in the wake of this really, really awful decision.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy Northrup. I should point out that they need 60 votes. And in talking to Amy Klobuchar and other senators yesterday, they say it's just not going to happen, not in this Congress, this 50-50 Senate. So they say it's an issue for the ballot box. Nancy Northrup, thanks very much. Thanks for being with us today from Jackson. Good day, everyone, from Washington, and welcome to a special Saturday edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. We begin with breaking news. You're looking live at the Supreme Court, where protesters have been gathering. They're rallying for a second day, while Roe opponents are celebrating. Public outrage is growing over the court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which for nearly a half-century guaranteed the right to an abortion. As of today, abortion is banned in at least 9 states, with trigger bans in several more set to take effect soon. Last hour, I spoke with Democratic Congresswoman Jackie Speer about the impact this could have on America's women.
The Constitution, when I went to law school, was a living, breathing document. And now they want to take us back. It is the greatest step back in women's rights in this country in our history. And we can't allow this to be retained. So there's many steps we have to take.
And also new today, President Biden signing that landmark gun bill into law, the first major legislation addressing gun violence in decades. This morning, the president celebrating a rare break in the partisan gridlock on Capitol Hill.
Today, we say more than enough. We say more than enough. It's time, when it seems impossible to get anything done in Washington, we are doing something consequential. If we can reach compromise on guns, we ought to be able to reach compromise on other critical issues.
And after signing that bill, the president immediately was boarding Air Force One to fly to Germany for a G7 summit of world leaders. His top domestic priority is to fight inflation here at home, and it is a global issue. A global rise in energy prices, partly because of the war in Ukraine. That's at the top of his agenda as he meets with his fellow leaders. And as Mr. Biden is traveling overseas, Bloomberg is now reporting that Germany is going to push for a G7 nation walk back on a key climate change commitment that would stop the financing of overseas fossil fuel projects by the end of the year. This, according to people familiar with the matter. But the draft text shared with Bloomberg does remain under debate. It could change before the end of this weekend's summit. Joining us now is NBC's Ali Rafa outside the Supreme Court, Cal Perry in St. Louis, and Kathy Park in Jackson, Mississippi. Ali, let's start with you at the court. What's going on now?
Andrea, we've been out here since around 6 o'clock in the morning when it was really just other members of the media, some early morning joggers. And as you can see, that's definitely not the case anymore. There are roughly 400 people out here chanting, making sure their voices are heard on both sides of this issue. This 9-foot-tall fencing outside the Supreme Court really serving as the front line of this battle over women's reproductive rights out here. These demonstrators have been largely peaceful today, really just chanting, sometimes getting in each other's faces, but really remaining non-violent. Security really ramped up here outside the Supreme Court. As you can see, they're sometimes going into circles, counter-demonstrating against each other, as some cheer the court's decision yesterday to overturn Roe v. Wade, and another side really wondering how it's even possible that the Supreme Court could strip away a right, a nearly 50-year-old right, for the first time in this country's history. We've talked to so many people out here today, people who say that they're frustrated this is even possible, that it opens the door for even more right Supreme Court decisions to be stripped away. And then you hear from the other side saying that they've been waiting years for this, and that since the beginning, rights to abortion were not covered under the Constitution. I spoke to a married couple here earlier today who actually drove here all the way from Cleveland overnight after learning about this decision to strike Roe v. Wade. Take a listen to a bit of their reaction.
This disproportionately affects women of color, poor women. It's a direct attack on socioeconomic groups that are, disparaged already.
It's disheartening. As time goes on, it's just sad to watch our country devolve. It's like we're supposed to be better as people. We're supposed to improve, make this a better country. And just to see this happen, it's disheartening.
That woman there, Ashley, told me that the only chance she thinks things could change is through the ballot box in the November midterm election. She said she's even willing to drive friends and families to the polls to make sure they get their vote out. That's really a sentiment we heard from so many people out here today as we continue seeing reaction to the Supreme Court's decision yesterday to overturn Roe v. Wade.
Thanks so much. Thanks to Ali Rafi. And it's obviously hard to work there in that noisy and very large crowd indeed. Cal Perry in St. Louis, Missouri, one of 9 states with trigger laws that have banned nearly all abortions after Roe was overturned. Cal.
Yeah, hi, Andrea. We understand that Missouri, at least according to its Attorney General, was the first of those 9 to officially make providing a woman an abortion illegal here. It is the provider, the doctor, who could face those felony B charges now. 5 to 15 years is the penalty that could be handed down here. I'm outside the Planned Parenthood in St. Louis, which was the only location which women could receive an abortion in Missouri. They notified the Department of Health about 20 minutes after that decision came down and after the Attorney General signed what was that trigger law, which was passed in 2019. Planned Parenthood notifying the Department of Health that they were ceasing operations, or at least providing that procedure for the first time in 50 years. We saw protests last night outside this location. Representative Cori Bush helped lead those protests. Andrea, I know she was on your show yesterday sharing her personal story about being raped at a young age, at the age of 17, and coming here to this location to receive an abortion, talking about how her life was forever different because of that procedure. After the protest, I had a chance to speak to some of the demonstrators, asking them what they would do now. And we heard so many of them say it was important to get out and vote and be a part of the political process. Take a listen.
Right now, there's so many people who have moved either back home or to states that are traditionally red. And now is the time where there's more, I would say, blue people in red states, and that is why it's so important. I think all of us agree that like voting is our #1 issue right now. Like
women should just have the right regardless. Doesn't matter if it's a horrible reason or if just someone wants to wake up one day and do it. It's every single person's right to do whatever they want to do with their body.
And Andrea, Representative Bush making the point to people in the crowd that if women in Missouri had an appointment here either yesterday or this weekend, they can go to Illinois. Obviously, the governor there is making it a priority to preserve the right to an abortion in that state. But there's a limited number of places in Illinois as well. And regionally, as this plays out and some of these trigger laws go into effect, of course, those sites are going to become overwhelmed. It's going to be harder and harder to make an appointment, not to mention, as you have been talking about, the travel, getting to these places can be very difficult. Andrea?
Thank you very much, Cal Perry in Missouri. And 2 senators today, in a new op-ed in the New York Times, are calling for the president to declare a public health emergency to try to protect abortion access for Americans. Joining us now is one of those senators, Democrat Sen Smith of Minnesota. Senator, thank you very much for being with us. So how would you...
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. But how would declaring a health emergency continue access for abortions now that so many states are making it a felony?
Well, what we want to do is to urge the president and the administration to use all of the executive powers that they have to protect access to abortion care wherever abortion care remains legal. I mean, the Supreme Court has spoken, but they do not get the last word. And that is what Elizabeth and I were focusing on in our commentary. You know, here's just one example of something that the administration has already done. Yesterday, they made it clear that FDA rules around the safety and effectiveness guidelines for using medication abortion, that those rules preempt rules that states might pass. So in states where abortion is still legal, medication abortion still needs to be available. And I just introduced legislation to make sure that that gets put into law. That's an example of the things that that the White House can do to protect all of the ways that that women have access to abortion care. But it's only going to be in those states where abortion is legal. And that is the tragedy of this Supreme Court decision.
So is there anything that you as a senator can do, you and Elizabeth Warren and others, who are advocating for some way to ameliorate this for women who say that they need and want to have an abortion for medical reasons and other reasons? What else can be done, given the fact that you can't seem to break that 60-vote filibuster requirement to try to codify
I mean,
Roe
that
v.
is
Wade?
exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right, Andrea. I mean, in the United States Senate, because of our rules, which I think should be changed, you are only able to pass legislation if you can get agreement among 60 senators. And that's not happening because Republicans blockade so many important pieces of legislation. So what we need to do is we need to look at a full throttled approach across the board. What executive action can we take? What can individuals do to support Planned Parenthood and other clinics around the country where abortion is still legal, to help people get to those places and to help them to protect, that access. And then, as we saw people, citizens out there across the country are saying, you need to use your vote. The Roe versus Wade will be on the ballot in just a few months, in November of 2022. And our voices are strong if we use them. And so much of our effort is going to be focused on getting people out to vote and making sure that their voices are heard.
I want to talk to you about the confirmation process, because the New York Times is reporting today that in notes taken by staff during Republican Susan Collins' 2018 meeting with Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, these notes indicate that Kavanaugh said, quote, Roe is 45 years old. It has been reaffirmed many times. Lots of people care about it a great deal. And I've tried to demonstrate I understand, the real world consequences. I don't rock the boat. I'm not a rock the boat, rather, kind of judge. I believe in stability and in the team of 9. Now, we note that we have not at NBC verified these notes, but Susan Collins separately has put out a statement saying that Justice Kavanaugh misled her, both in his testimony, sworn testimony to judiciary, and in their private meeting. Do you think that this will affect public attitudes towards the court, respect for the court?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts about this. Having served in the Senate when Justice Kavanaugh's nomination was going through, I never had any doubt that he would be a vote to overturn Roe. All you had to do was to look at what the then president of the United States, had said, that he was intent on appointing anti-choice judges. Justice Kavanaugh and Justice Coney Barrett were vetted by the Federalist Society, whose mission is to put conservative, extreme judges on the United States Supreme Court. And I think that it is a politicization of the court that we have to understand and we have to see. I think it's one of the reasons that we see such low credibility for the Supreme Court right now. This is why the doctrine of stare decisis, which is a legal term, but it basically means that you don't change the direction of the Supreme Court based on the political or policy choices of the Supreme Court, that past precedent should rule. It's why it's so important, and why the actions of this court and the Alito opinion just undermine that, and I think dramatically damage the credibility of this court.
Your Democratic colleague, Joe Manchin, says that he's alarmed that Justices Kavanaugh and Gorsuch voted to overturn Roe after testifying they believe the case was settled legal precedent. Senator Manchin now says he would support legislation to codify Roe, but it seems, I don't think that he's changed his position on the filibuster. And your colleague, Amy Klobuchar, told me yesterday that, without the filibuster rule being changed, codifying Roe is not going to happen.
That's exactly right. Amy is exactly right. The filibuster rule basically says that you have to have 60 members of the Senate in order to pass a piece of legislation. Mind you, understand that Mitch McConnell changed the filibuster rule so that it doesn't apply to Supreme Court justices. So it's certainly okay in their mind to put a lifetime appointment onto the Supreme Court with a simple majority, but not to codify the basic protections of Roe versus Wade into law. So, I think that is inconsistent. I think that after due debate, that the majority should rule. That's how state legislatures and city councils and most governing bodies around the world function. And the fact that the Senate doesn't function that way means that we're unable to take action to put into law what the vast majority of Americans want, in this case, to protect Roe versus Wade. This isn't some sort of a big, out in the world, I think something like 2/3 of Americans say that they believe that abortion should be legal in most or all circumstances.
Senator Tina Smith from Minnesota, thank you.
Thanks, Andrea.
And abortion in the midterms, the political impact. How much effect will the Supreme Court decision have on races in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Georgia, Ohio? You're watching a Saturday edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. We'll be right back. This is MSNBC. And that will do it for me on this Saturday edition of Andrea Mitchell Reports. Thanks for being with us. I'll see you again on Monday at noon Eastern. Up next, Yasmin Isugian is continuing our live coverage on the Supreme Court right here on MSNBC.